Let's talk about amatonormativity. First of all, I know it's a complicated word. I highly recommend practicing saying it out loud. So once again, amatonormativity. Okay, let's dive into what this actually means. The term amatonormativity is a term that was originally coined by Elizabeth Brake. It refers to all of these entrenched social norms and the assumptions that we have that a central, exclusive sexual and romantic relationship is, first of all, normal for everyone to have. Second of all, is part of what it is to have a flourishing life, that somebody is missing something if they don't have that central, exclusive sexual and romantic relationship. And third of all, that sexual and romantic relationship should be the most important part of somebody's life, that it necessarily deserves priority over other types of relationships. Now, all of that sounds like a lot. And so at first you might think, no, that's not everywhere around us. But then you start looking at things like Disney movies. Then you start listening to the songs on Spotify. And you start looking around at all of the TV shows that we tend to watch. So many of them are centrally about sexual and romantic relationships, right? That sexual and romantic relationships are presumed to be the most important kind of relationship a person could have. Think about any of those Disney movies. Think about like Cinderella or Snow White or, Aladdin. The whole deal of them is that they are characters who are searching for true love. And as soon as they find that true love, they live happily ever after. I mean, Cinderella was just emotionally abused by her stepmother, like truly for much of her life. She needs a great deal of support and therapy. Having a lovely little romantic relationship with Prince Charming will be delightful, but it is not going to make her life perfect right now, right? Like she needs a little bit more support than that. But we tend to assume that, once you find your one true love, that will just fix everything. Once you've got it, things are perfect. And there's so much pressure on people to be seeking out and maintaining that very specific kind of relationship. So let's see here. If you're seeing relatives for the first time after a long time, many people report the experience of having the first question be, so do you have a boyfriend? Do you have a girlfriend? How's it going? Have you found the one yet? Oh, don't worry. They're out there. You're like, no, wait, I'm in a play and that's what I'm really pumped about. Like, the sex and the romance is not the thing that I'm like trying to orient my life around, right? So we tend to have all of these different kinds of social norms and social interactions that presume that everyone is working, again, to have this very specific kind of relationship. Even more than that, there are all kinds of official government structures, official institutional policies, all this kind of not just social recognition for these kinds of romantic relationships, but specific tax breaks, benefits, healthcare benefits, the fact that you can inherit things from people you are, or from one person, only one person, I'll talk about that in a bit, that you are married to, in a way that we just don't provide that kind of, not just, again, recognition, but specific governmental and institutional support for other kinds of relationships. We don't do that for, say, important friendships, or, folks who might have never had any kind of sexual or romantic history, but have decided to enter into a co-parenting relationship. We do not have that same kind of, again, legal or institutional support or recognition for these sorts of relationships that don't fit into the very narrow mold of central, exclusive sexual or romantic relationships. Once again, if you look at all these Disney movies or listen to songs on the radio, so many of them are about sex and romance. Sometimes you'll see things about, maybe like casual sex. There's often this presumption that the point of casual sex is to eventually settle down and find the one. We also tend to equate adulthood with having this kind of central, exclusive, sexual, and romantic relationship. That one, oh, if they don't have that kind of relationship, maybe it's just because they're too immature. Maybe they just need to grow up a little bit and then they'll be able to settle down, right? So think about the ways that we treat people differently on the basis of whether or not they are in this one specific kind of relationship. In fact, we even have, all of these prescriptive norms about what that relationship ought to look like. This is what's called the relationship escalator. So the relationship escalator is an unofficial set of norms and expectations about what these kinds of central, exclusive, sexual and romantic relationships are expected to look like. That one might start off by, I don't know, hanging out, texting, messaging. Maybe back in the day, you start off going on dates. Most people don't do it quite that way anymore. You hang out for a while. Maybe eventually you start hooking up. You sort of eventually have this talk like, are we kind of dating? Maybe at some point you're like, okay, you know what? We are in a relationship. Presumed to go along with that, being in a relationship, is the expectation that being in a relationship means being monogamous, right? That it is an exclusive relationship. It is one that does not involve, sexual or romantic encounters with anyone else. All right. Excuse me. As that relationship goes forward, it is expected to keep going up these specific steps on the relationship escalator. So people might start off, again, dating, then they might become exclusive. After a while, there's this thought of, okay, next you move in together. Maybe eventually you get engaged and then married and then have kids. If somebody is at any one of those steps on the relationship escalator for a while, they might experience having friends or family be like, oh, how are things going? It seems like, you've been, just dating for a while now. Is that relationship in trouble? Right? Or are things stalled out? Right? So there's this assumption that in order for it to be a good relationship, or in order for it to be a flourishing or real relationship, it needs to be continuously advancing up these steps of the relationship escalator. Now, crucially, the relationship escalator is considered to be a one-way trip, right? So in our social world, if you move in with a significant other and then are like, oh, wow, we have wildly different sleep schedules. This is non-ideal. It's not easy to just move back out. People will be like, oh, I don't know if the relationship can survive that. Or there's this assumption that once you moved in, the only reasonable way to move out is if you break up, right? We tend not to allow for space for the moving up and down along the relationship escalator. So it's setting these extremely, again, strong social norms about what healthy relationships are expected to look like. Now, I do want to be quite clear. The steps of the relationship escalator can work well for people. Lots of folks do find that these steps work delightfully. However, the problem is that we use these steps to evaluate whether or not the relationship is a healthy one. And that's the part that really does not work, right? If a relationship is doing well, it is doing well because people are caring for one another, are communicating with one another, have one another's needs and well-being in mind, right? As well as just meshing well. It's not because you're moving along these steps at a particular time, right? There can be wonderful relationships where we have zero interest in children and the relationship is fantastic. It doesn't mean that the relationship is less real. It doesn't mean that the relationship is in trouble, right? So when there's all of this pressure for people to be taking these particular steps, it can force people into steps that they might not want to take, that might not work well for them. It can force people into things that can be very toxic or harmful to them. It can serve as a way to invalidate relationship structures and experiences that don't fit those steps. And finally, it can trap people into relationships that really, really are harmful or toxic. So one of the harmful dimension, there are many harmful dimensions of the relationship escalator, is that it tells people that you need to stay on the relationship escalator. You need to have a really powerful reason to leave or exit it. And so you'll often find people saying things like, oh, I've been with my partner for a while. They're such a great person. They're wonderful. I'm not really happy, but they aren't cheating on me or anything. So like, I guess I should just, I'm fine. We should just keep going. There's not a good enough reason to break up. When in fact, if somebody isn't happy, that's a great reason to break up, right? So the relationship escalator really presumes that, again, you have to keep advancing up these steps, and that once you've reached that top step, you need to stay at it. The relationship escalator views breakups as an indictment on the entire relationship, that if people break up, that presumes that the whole relationship was either a disaster or a waste of time. It doesn't allow for the possibility of saying, it was wonderful, and then as human beings, we changed and evolved and grew in different directions, and now we're going our separate ways, right? The relationship escalator doesn't allow for that possibility, and that can be particularly rough. The relationship escalator presumes that people are going to demonize their exes, that you have to, again, like never have contact with an ex again, that would be strange to stay friends with an ex. And yes, if somebody has been harmful or things have gone badly, being friends, not a great idea. But there are often great reasons why you're with the person in the first place. And if you choose to stay friends, that can also be wonderful and fantastic. But our social world views that as atypical or strange. It's very frowned upon. All right, so we live in a world that presumes that everyone not only wishes to have, but should have this central, exclusive sexual and romantic relationship in their lives. That it's something that everyone should be orienting their lives around and taking all of these, various steps in order to find that relationship and then have that relationship go forward in this very particular, specific kind of way.